So I think we're ready to introduce Tracy one more time. And if you are all set, Susan, I think we're ready for Tracy.
I'm good. Tracy, take it away.
Yay, composting. All right. So I'm here to talk about composting as part of the solution for global change. And before we get started, I heard a little bit of the conversations going on while I was getting on here. And we really want people to understand what composting is. And so basically it's a decomposition of organic materials in oxygen-rich conditions by microbes, and that's really an important part. So it's really simple, and it's something that everyone can do. We can all start with our next meal. And as you learn in this presentation, there's a variety of composting benefits and methods. And so we'll talk more about them as we move through. And some things to consider as we dive deeper into this topic is how composting is connected to a host of other issues. And so you can see on the right, for example, over 30% of all food produced in the US ends up in landfills. Landfills are the third largest source of methane in the US. And also composting draws attention to food waste and the fact that we need more effective systems and structures to ensure that millions of food insecure Americans and not landfills gain access to healthy food. So we'll talk more about these things as we get through the slides, but we just want to frame what composting is exactly before we dive in. So on to the next slide, Madi. And so why composting? You know, for me, running a composting company, I can talk about this stuff all day, but we're going to distill it into some important messages. And basically, when we choose to take our food scraps and put them into a composting process, instead of wasting them in a landfill, we are contributing to a global benefit. And some of those benefits listed here, it keeps food scraps out of our landfills, which are already overcrowded, and which reduces methane emissions that are associated with putting organics like food scraps into landfills that contribute to climate change. Composting can reduce the need for fertilizers, which can contribute to the imbalances in the watershed that lead to algae blooms. It can improve the health of soil life, as well as soil texture and porosity, and improves the water holding capacity of soil. So ultimately holding more water and nutrients in place instead of running off. It helps us understand the full value of food, that food is not just something we eat, but also the combination of soil and water and nutrients, human care and attention, energy, travel, time, all of that it took to get food to our plate. And it really, you know, it strengthens communities' relationships, it improves neighborhoods. It, you know, when we make and use compost in our own backyard and at community sites, we keep valuable nutrients and the entire financial investment that we made in food in our communities. And there's an interesting infographic here that sort of breaks down what the profile of compostables are going into the landfill and alternatives to that. So let's go to the next slide. All right. So we'll start talking about some of these interconnections. So climate change is a big one. So an important benefit of composting is that it can reduce the impacts of climate change. So there's a number of human activities that are affecting the whole Earth system, creating imbalances that are accelerating. And these behaviors are activities that increase the release of heat trapping gases in the atmosphere, which contribute to ocean warming and acidification, rising sea levels, intensifying storm activity, and heavy rainfall events. And the diagram on the right here, it shows how human activities are enhancing greenhouse effects on the planet. So you can take a look at that. And then the charts at the bottom, they illustrate the increase in CO2 and methane emissions over the last 70 years. You can see those below there. And then next slide, Madi. And methane emissions. So one of the benefits of taking action to compost is that it can reduce landfill-related methane emissions. And you know, as we already mentioned, landfills are the third largest source of methane emissions in the US, according to the EPA, which is the result of having organics like food scraps mixed in and compacted with all the other garbage in the landfill. So this results in an anaerobic process, which means decomposition in the absence of oxygen. And what I find when I'm out in the community teaching is a lot of people don't know how landfills work. They don't know where their landfill is. They don't know how much material is going into the landfill every day, what happens after material goes to their curb. And I really highly recommend that people take a tour of their local landfill or recycling facility and learn firsthand how these materials are managed and processed. It's actually pretty fun, and it's very eye-opening. So think about that, and just remember that methane is a potent greenhouse gas emission, and we can do something about this by starting to compost. All right, let's go on to the next slide. So another one is altered nutrient cycles, and you can see here, this slide is very dense with a lot of rich content and information, but I want to just draw your attention to a few points, beginning with the fact that the creation of fertilizers through activities like phosphate mining and can disrupt natural nutrient cycling and can result in some toxic byproducts. So excess use of fertilizers, including nutrients like phosphorus and nitrogen, can result in runoff and leaching into our waterways. And these sources come from agriculture, food production, industry, residential activities, all further disrupting the natural cycles, which can harm biodiversity and increase the watershed pollution. So you can see these two slides here, they illustrate some of the nutrient cycling, where nutrients coming from, where are they going, and how are they impacting the system as a whole. And when these excess nutrients in fertilizers and other sources that run off from our farms or our landscapes, along with other contaminants like uncontained pet manure, they flow into waterways and can create conditions that produce the algae blooms. And as we know, the blooms can consume too much oxygen or block sunlight. They can produce toxins, all of which can kill aquatic life and lead to dead zones and have significant economic impacts. So, in this state in Florida, water is so important to us. Water is the major driver of the economy. It's a huge factor in the health and happiness of the residents. And so we have to do what we can together to keep our waters clean. And, the way that I explain to people is basically whatever is happening on the land is happening in the water. So keeping those things interconnected. You can go to the next slide. So here we're talking about some community impacts, and there can be rich community building components to composting that people are not always aware of. Composting in your backyard or at a community drop-off site not only builds soil, but it can contribute to gardens and neighborhood greening projects. And what we see is it creates opportunities for people to cross paths that may not have otherwise crossed paths when they meet at the compost bins. And it's an opportunity to create local healthy food, education, skill building, potentially green jobs right within people's neighborhoods. And we even see, whether it's community composting out at community sites or in your backyard, we see that people can work together to harvest the benefits of composting. So the human factor is really important here. And on the right, you see some youth from Opelika who are part of a community garden. And they're experiencing nature and being part of the whole system. Obviously looking like they're having a good time. And then on the left, we see some photos of some folks who are bringing their food scrap buckets to a community compost bin, participating in a project. And then in the middle, we have the food recovery hierarchy. And this is basically when people start composting, they, as we've talked about already, they become more aware of food waste, because household food waste starts to become measurable and personal as folks start collecting those food scraps that were not eaten. And so we can use composting as a way to focus people's attention on the challenges of food waste, and just on the fact that it's important to compost inedible food scraps, but the highest best use of food is to make sure, first and foremost, that it gets to people. And then there's climate impacts of wasting food at every step in the food supply chain. So it's another way to consider impacts around climate. And this image, that food recovery hierarchy, just really helps prioritize which actions to take first. All right, we can go to the next slide. All right, and we have a few featured initiatives here, beginning with the Opelika Community Development Corporation. And they are in partnership with Health in the Hood, providing examples of some of these community benefits. So collectively, they have worked to combat food and health injustices, including food deserts, through community gardening, nutrition, fitness education, creating access to fresh food, jobs, and healthy lifestyles for families living on low incomes. And these projects are queuing up to start community composting programs to add another element so community members can drop off food scraps that can be turned into a soil amendment that will feed the soil, that will feed more people, creating more jobs and more health. And there's details, you can find out more about them on the links below. And then the next slide. And then we have the Sustainability Division of North Miami. They focus on the city's environment, economy, and social equity. And their Resilient NOMI initiative is inspiring students to be stewards, residents. It's inspiring residents and students to be stewards of sustainability. And then Back to Earth. So this is a local composting company that was started by a group of solution-oriented siblings that focuses on educating kids and families to compost and provide community-powered collection service. Next slide. And we have the FIU Office of University Sustainability, and along with the FIU community and the agroecology program, help maintain the nature preserve at MMC, where there is a compost site underway to begin collecting pre-consumer food scraps. And then the BBC campus would also like to replicate this plan. And the agroecology program, it's a comprehensive program. It focuses on the interface between agriculture, natural ecosystems, and urban development. And there's a wide range of opportunities for students to become involved with these programs. So you can learn more through the links below.
And something I wanted to add up here is the Parking and Sustainability Office, they do accept volunteers. So if you do need to make up any hours for your global learning courses or any honors, perhaps, this is a great opportunity to get involved as well. You don't have to be a science major to volunteer for the Sustainability Office.
Okay, okay, thank you, Marie. All right, yeah, next slide. All right, so we can talk about some composting options that are available to you. And so you can collect your food scraps at home every week and then drop them off at a community compost pile. You can collect your food scraps at home every week and then put them in your home compost system, which may be a worm composting system, a bokashi system, a tumbler, or a larger backyard bin. And you'll see on the side of the slide here that there's this decision tree that talks about all these different ways that can help you decide what is the best system, what is the best method for you. Okay, next slide. And here we are really emphasizing that point that transitioning from the idea of waste to resources. So remember that food scraps only become a waste when we put them in the garbage. Here are images of how we can collect the scraps in our kitchens and then bring them to the compost site or to your backyard. So you see a green bin that someone's using here and they're putting it under their sink. And there's a silver bin that someone's putting on their kitchen counter. And there's a white bin that someone is storing their food scraps in their refrigerator until they're ready to put them in the compost bin. And here's another one of a brown bag in the freezer that they're being stored until they bring them to their compost bin. There's another one of small bags of material being put together into a larger bag, and then another image of what a community, some kinds of versions of a community compost drop-off site might look like. So basically, you're going to put your scraps in a bin, you're going to store them until the end of the week, and then you're going to drop them off either at a community site or in your personal compost bin to go into the composting process. All right, next slide. And these are some examples just to give you ideas of what kind of composting bins are out there. So on one side we have yard bins, and those are backyard bins that people are using. A geo bin, which can be formed to be very narrow or very large depending on your scale. We have a rotating bin that people use in small spaces or in their yards. I've had people put these, as mentioned in the previous slide, on balconies and apartments. And then we have two larger yard bins. And then on one side, we have examples of vermicomposting and bokashi. So vermicomposting is composting, letting worms do the main bulk of the decomposition. And bokashi is a fermentation process, which is a little bit different from these other systems, but can take some materials that aren't typically accepted in some of the other systems. Okay, next slide. And here's some do-it-yourself bins. So I certainly have made a variety of these over the years, and people can do this too. So you can make composting bins out of everyday materials or repurposed materials. So there's a large plastic storage bin that was turned into a worm bin, you can see at the bottom. And then on the other side, on the right side, there's some old bins that were garbage cans that you drilled holes in them and turned them into compost bins. There's hardware cloth that you can find, from using up from other projects, put it in a cylinder, turn it into a compost bin. And then pallet bins are pretty popular if you can find pallets that haven't been treated. And at the bottom, there's a 3-bin system. And basically in one section of that, there would be storage materials that are just browns. In the middle section, you'd have food scraps that you would add browns to, that would be your active pile. And then on the other side, you'd have your compost that's sitting there curing, getting ready to be used. So those are some do-it-yourself bins. Okay, next slide. And then this is really the nuts and bolts of the process. So there's 4 main ingredients that we mix together to invite the presence of microbes. And when I work with kids, I just tell them, like, here's the ingredients to make lunch for nature, and they get it really quick. So the first one is browns, and that's a carbon source. So we're looking at leaves, shredded brown bags, paper, cardboard, mulch, straw, anything like that. The next one, and browns, they're carbon, they're typically brown in color. Greens are your nitrogen source, and this is where your food scraps come in. They're not all green color, but that's been sort of the language used in the industry. So it's your nitrogen sources. So this can be, untreated grass clippings, healthy garden debris, your vegetable kitchen scraps, which is really what we're talking about here, is your food scraps. Herbivore manures potentially, if that's you have animals like that. And then the other 2 ingredients are water and air. So we need to keep your compost needs to stay moist as a wrung out sponge, and then throughout the entire combination of materials. And then you want to aerate it as much as possible, or at least once a week, to keep the airflow in there. And this just creates a good combination for the microbes to show up. And then on the far right, we have ingredients, a guideline to ingredients that you want to use in your backyard compost systems. Worms have a slightly different diet, so you want to look specifically for worm diet if you're just doing a worm composting system. But basically, we're looking at fruit and vegetable and grain-based materials to put in the bin, and we're keeping out animal products, of different kinds that you can read on this list here. Okay.
Tracy, would you let us know what is a good ratio? So how much brown am I supposed to put in versus a green in a composting pile?
Yep, what I use is basically, I go by volume, because it gets a little confusing when you talk about the embodied carbon and nitrogen in specific materials, since it's different from. So the really simple way is usually I would say about 2 to 3 let's say buckets of browns for 1 bucket of greens. So it kind of depends on how moist or what kind of materials. For sturdier carbon, you could use a little bit less. So sturdier carbon would be like a mulch, whereas like a softer carbon would be straw. And then so it's about like that. So when you dump into your compost bin, put 2.5 times as much browns after you make your deposit. That would be a simple way to put it.
I have a related question. So let's say you're just a kitchen composter. Do you need to add some browns to your bin, or should you just or if you have a little bucket that you're putting kitchen scraps in, do you need to add some browns to that, or can you just do the kitchen scraps?
You can just put the kitchen scraps into a bin, but once you deposit it, if you're depositing it in your backyard bin, you need to add browns. If you're depositing it at a community compost drop site, you do not need to add anything. The composter typically will manage the process and the ratio of materials at a drop-off site. Okay? Okay, all right. Next, okay. And so here we are just reminding you to extend that thought of waste to resource, and that recycling is another way to transform waste into resources. And just that it's important that we keep our clean and dry aluminum and steel cans, plastic bottles and jugs, paper and cardboard, that they get into your curbside recycling bin and out to the curb. Yeah, so that's really what's important here, is we need to also remember the important basics of recycling and keep that going side by side with our composting processes. Okay, next slide. All right, and then basically the key message is that human-derived problems can be addressed with human-derived solutions. We are the solution. We have so many options to participate. And there's a summary of different actions that we talked about in the slide presentation here. And we just want everyone to take a step forward and be part of the solution. Okay? All right, I'm complete.
Awesome.
Thank you, Tracy.
Good job.
You're welcome.
We do
Yay.
have a couple of questions in the chat.
I will do my best to answer them.
Okay, so Beulah asks, and I have the similar question. So there's a composting site in every community or city. Where can you find a composting drop-off site?
Okay. There is not a composting drop site in every city, especially not in Florida, which is part of the reason why we decided to show up, is that there's a niche that needs to be filled here. There's also not larger composting infrastructure, whether it's community composting or municipal industrial scale composting. So I think the first part of the question was, is there one in every city? And the answer is no. You do have to do some digging to find them. In your region, I know there are, I don't know the specific sites. I think Mari knows some of them, and you can look up, for example, looking into Back to Earth and finding out, they don't cover a whole region. They are very, they cover a small section of Miami, but I know that there's more that are popping up right now because this is such a critical need. So not only do I encourage you to find those, but I encourage you to start those.
Right. So sometimes you're going to be able to find them at farmers market. I know the Miami Beach Botanic Garden does accept food scraps all year round. They're still accepting them even during COVID. So you can also call and see which locations are taking compost during COVID. Because of the moment, it varies. There's a lot of different locations around Midtown. There is a store called Verde. Verde, it's like an all sustainable container. Basically, you don't have any packaging to take back home. So you bring your own container and you get like your cereal or your shampoo all in containers that you can constantly recycle. And I know they're also offering to take in your composting, and I believe it's Back to Earth, the group that we were talking about, that has that location set up over there. We do have on, I'm sure Susan's going to talk to you guys a little bit more about like the MESAN website that we have. There is a resource page there into this website where you can take a look at the different locations in Miami. So we do have a resource page for you to be able to access after this webinar. That way you can get familiarized on how you can start your own composting and where you can drop off your compost if you decide to, store it and then drop it off at a composting site.
And one other thing is that my experience with some of the student groups that I've worked with is that there's different clubs, different green clubs, environmental clubs, and like one or two of them who live off campus will get a composting bin, and they'll let everybody in the group deposit into that bin, because it's very unlikely that with some of these larger bins that any individual or double household's going to fill them. And so that's a way to do a small grassroots kind of community composting that could be accessible to students.
And you mentioned in the presentation that there is some activity on BBC and MMC for composting. Could you talk a little bit more about that? It wasn't clear.
Sure. So we did get in communication with the sustainability office, and they told us they want to start a composting site at BBC. So we all know that not we all know, but there is a garden on the MMC campus, and they do accept compost, but it's through the gardening club. So if you do want to drop off some of your compost, you have to contact the gardening club, which we did put the information. Let me see if I can go back on the slides so you guys can have a better look. Oh, my apologies. How can I go back? Hang on one second. So Community initiatives. Okay, so these are locations where you can drop them off. So you can get in contact with the agroecology program. They're the ones that run the gardening club.
Yeah, we're not seeing a change in your slide. That's okay though. Yeah.
Yeah. Here it is.
Okay, there you go.
So yeah, so they do want to start something at BBC. They are just in the beginning phase, but the best way to get involved is helping the sustainability office by volunteering or getting involved with the agroecology program.
Okay. And where is the sustainability office on BBC? Do you know?
Yes, it is where, I don't know the name of the building, is where One Stop is. Is right next to One Stop.
Okay, yes.
Like the middle
Yes.
building.
Right, so probably academic one in the first floor. Yeah,
Right.
All right, cool. Okay, yes, we're based up at BBC, that's why.
Perfect.
All right. Okay. So we're on the compost, there we go. So do you want to talk about the MESAN, or do you want me to, because the students have gone through and uploaded images and through the MESAN app. So I think they're fairly familiar with it.
Great. Yeah, so I guess this is one of the reasons why we wanted to share this composting webinar with you all, to really show why digital theories is so important actually in sustainability, why we actually need great communicators in sustainability, or in any science truly, because we can have the science, but we need people out there to share the message in a way that people can truly take it in, right? And we also need to be out there collecting data and making sense of it as well. So here you're gonna see, I'm sure Susan mentioned it already, but this is a great tool that we're using to measure more or less how much landfill you are diverting, right? And how much of it you're making it into a resource by composting and by also recycling your items, which is great. We did go over, you guys did submit some of your pictures, so thank you for doing that. That way we can take a look at like how are you composting, or what kind of items we can recommend you to, maybe recycle or compost, or think of it a little bit different than just throwing it into your landfill. So here's a couple of pictures of my bins essentially. So on the left hand side, you see my landfill. This one, for example, this is a Amazon Prime bag that does have plastic inside, and it also has paper. So sometimes things can get a little bit confusing. And so this one, in this case, I did throw it out. But on the right-hand side, remember that pizza boxes does serve as your browns. So what I did, I broke down my pizza box, and this is actually going to serve me as a brown material for my composting yard. Here in the bottom left, it's my recyclable items. So when you do participate in the MESAN activity on the mobile device, what you want to make sure is that those recyclable items, you press them down as much as possible before you're measuring like the weight and the volume, especially for the volume reasons. And on the right-hand side, you're going to see some of my compost. I change my bin all the time. It's whatever works. So in this case, I just had also a packaging bag. So I liked it because it had kind of like that. I just know like there wasn't going to run any nutrients or any liquids were going to come out. So I used that one. I liked it too. And so here, would you like me to show how we're recording volume? And yeah, okay. So here's how I like to record volume. We did create a video that maybe we can show later.
Yeah.
Would you like me to run?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So give me 1 second. Let me pull it up. But in the meantime, you can take a look at the slides.
Okay. Yeah, so trying to figure out how much you have, that's the volume or the weight, can be a little tricky, and Mari made a little video to show us.
Yeah, I'm trying to pull it up right now. Just had it.
Okay. So the easier part is to weigh the compost or the recycling by stepping on the scale by yourself, and then stepping on the scale with your compost and, subtracting the difference. Are you ready?
Yep.
Okay, go ahead.
All right, so let's go.
You may have to unshare if you're, yeah, there you go.
This is Marie. I'm going to show you
now
how
it's
you
running.
can record the
Now you have to reshare.
Gotcha. Let's see. Now I'm going to reshare. Let's go here.
Okay.
All right, let me know if you guys can't hear the audio, just in case.
Hi everyone, this is Marie. I'm going to show you how you can record the weight and volume of your compost, recyclable, and landfill bin using items that you have at home, such as a tape measurement, jars, measuring cups, and a bathroom scale. Don't forget to record your activity into the MESAN resource monitoring app. Let's get started. To access the resource monitoring app, you can scan this QR code with your mobile device or simply go to mesan.miami/monitor. For weight, in my case, I'm going to be using a bathroom scale because that's what I have available at home, but maybe you have a kitchen scale where you could use that to weigh your items. Here's where I like to keep my food scraps, and because my bin right now is completely full, I kept the rest of my weekly food scraps in a plastic bag frozen. So I'm going to get on the bathroom scale with both. And right now my weight is 130. Scraps aside, weigh myself now. I'm weighing 121. The difference is 9 pounds. So basically on the MESAN resource app, I'm going to go ahead and put it's been 10 days worth of compost, and this is going to be just 9 pounds worth. For volume, there are so many ways that you can record volume. You really have to find what works best for you and depending on the type of container that you're using for your food scraps, for your recyclables, and your landfills. So I'm going to show you from the easiest to the most mathematical way that you can find volume. The easiest thing to do is put your food scraps into a measuring cup. Easy breezy. It tells you exactly how much you have, and it tells you the units of measure. You don't have to do any math. You just have to add. That's it. Like I said, some containers tell you the volume that you're dealing with. This one in particular, it didn't. So what I did, I went on Google, and it asked me to report to measure the radius and to measure the height. So there's plenty of volume online calculators depending on the size or the shape of your container. You can figure out the volume. Because I measured, here's an important thing. Because you're measuring things in different ways, it's important that you take the picture and upload it into the MESAN website, and also report if you're using inches or centimeters, or you're using ounces or cups. To measure the weight of my recycling items, I'm going to use the same method I use for the composting, which is using a bathroom scale. Get on the bathroom scale with your recycling items, off the bathroom scale, and now just stand on the scale without the recycling items. Subtract the first number minus the second, and that should give you just the weight of your recycling items. To record the volume, remember to press down as much as you can the items. Because I have a rectangular bin, I can simply multiply the length times width times height, and that should give me the volume of my total crate. Because my crate is half full, I'm going to use half of the volume, and because I measured it in inches, I'm going to insert the units of measure in inches cubed. To weigh your landfill bin, practice the same thing. You can get on the bathroom scale with your materials, and then back on the bathroom scale without the materials and subtract the difference. For your landfill, remember to press all the items down as much as you can. Usually in the trash bags, it indicates the volume that you're dealing with. Because my bag was only half full, I'm going to say that it's only half of the gallons that it indicates. As you can see, there are a variety of different ways that you can measure your volume and your weight. It truly depends on the items that you are utilizing at home. It depends on the bins you're using and the way that you're composting. In my case, I am using the bin it, freeze it, drop off method, which means I keep my food scraps in a bin before I'm ready to take them to a composting site. Maybe you already have a composting site at home in your yard, and so you just have to measure, how many cups am I putting in today? This amount, and that's it. You don't have to keep anything in your kitchen. And so it really depends what works best for you. So I hope this video was helpful and can't wait to see you soon. Bye-bye.
All right. That explains the MESAN resource monitoring app.
Woohoo! Yay, great video.
Hopefully it was helpful. Let's really hope so.
Great job.
Okay. So are we at the end of our presentation?
Mari, I see your Google Drive.
You
So
still do? Oh, thank you. Yes, okay. Yeah, so should we launch a poll to see how we did?
Yes. Why don't you unshare for a moment?
You got it.
Can you launch the poll from your site, from your end?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
go ahead then.
All right, guys, so we're gonna go ahead and launch a poll. Just let us know the answers for you, what works, the right answer for you. So here we go. The first question you should be seeing right now is, what activities contributes to the third largest source of methane in the United States? Go ahead, insert your answer there. You have 4 options: growing trees, organic waste in landfills, driving cars, or agriculture. This one's actually a single choice response, so you can only choose one answer.
Okay.
So,
Mari, I can still see your screen in the back.
Why don't you unshare your screen?
how about now?
No,
Can you see the poll? Yeah, I start seeing people with the poll.
I see. I have the poll up, but I see your Google Drive in the background.
Oh, interesting. Okay, let's see. I don't know why.
We can still do the poll, so the students are doing the poll.
Sorry about that, guys. Okay, so let me stop sharing, but you should still be.
Yeah,
Yes,
we're good.
good.
This is a slide. And share. Huh. All right. Let's see.
Okay, we have 10%.
Just gonna share my desktop for a second, really quickly. How about now?
Yep.
Okay,
Yep,
thank you.
good. All right, we have 13% voted. We have 30% now.
Wow, you guys are good. I see the right answers here. Amazing. Remember, some of them are single choice response and other ones you can choose multiple response. And don't worry, your name won't be shown. Just want to make sure that, we were able to deliver the message. So I see here the second question was, how can composting reduce impacts of global change, essentially climate change, and alter nutrient cycles? Remember, the alter nutrient cycles talks about the nitrogen and the phosphorus that sometimes ends up in our waterways from too much fertilizers, or the decomposition of our food scraps sometimes that trickles down the soil and then down to the water.
Okay, we have 56%, 60%.
Third question is, what are some of the additional benefits of community composting? You have a couple of choices here. And our last question says, do you have a plan to try to implement one of the activities you learned about today and record and report it using a smartphone or other device? Thanks for the honesty, guys. This is good.
We have 73% 80%, 76%. Okay, I'll give you all 30 seconds more.
If you guys want us to go back to any of the slides, you're to take a screenshot maybe of the items. You're also welcome to drop that on the chat. I'll be happy to go back any slide that you may need. So just drop it in the chat or any additional questions too.
All right, 80%. Last chance, last 10 seconds.
Come on, we're only missing six more people.
Well, no, there's, okay. I'm going to end the poll now.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. So I'm gonna go ahead and take a picture over here.
Do you want me to share the results?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Okay, so for the first one, 80% said the activity that contributes to the third largest source of methane in the US is organic waste in landfills. I think that's right.
Yep, we did good.
Okay. How can composting reduce impacts of global change? Most people selected composting decreases landfill waste and methane emissions. And
Great.
composting decreases the need for fertilizers. Very good. Oh, look, number 3. What are some of the additional benefits? All of the above, the top answer.
Yes, indeed. So remember, I'm sorry, go ahead, Susan.
I was going to say that is correct.
Yeah, that is correct. So just one thing I wanted to make sure that people understand is that closing the loop, remember that we want to help communities as well. So by dropping off your food composting, you're giving back to Earth and you're also helping your community. So that's closing the loop essentially.
Okay, so do you plan to try to implement one of the activities you learned about today? So most people said yes, however, I'm not going to use a smartphone app. That's okay. We're just happy to get the message out. I'm going to stop sharing.
Go on.
Okay. All right, and I'm going to close this. Okay. So poll Q&A, we did the poll.
These are some of the most frequently asked questions. We
can't see it. Sorry, we cannot see it.
Oh, interesting.
There we go.
Voila, thank you. So yeah, these are the frequently asked questions. And so if you have any questions for Tracy, then we can go ahead and start with those. So, yep. If you have any questions, you can drop them in the chat. We'll be happy to answer them for you.
So I'm going to ask one of the questions. What are the essential tools and materials that you need to compost? And maybe divide sort of like the kitchen composter from the yard composter.
Okay. When you say kitchen composter, you mean the food scrap collection bucket?
Yeah, so I'm thinking a bunch of us live in apartments or condos.
Right.
And also some of us live in homes that have like yards where you could put a bin.
Okay. Yeah, so I think if you are in a home with a yard, then essential tools would be, you'd want some kind of system to put your material in, obviously something for your kitchen to collect scraps, some kind of system in your backyard, put the scraps in. You'd want some kind of tool to aerate the compost with. So once a week you put the tool in, you mix up the materials. And you would need water and, maybe a bag of old leaves or something, or some mulch or something like that to throw in there. That would be for if you have a yard. If you don't have a yard, then the essential tools would be, again, that kitchen compost, the kitchen food scrap bin to collect your materials. And then in an apartment, you could use a worm bin. Worm bins can be an indoor, inside your apartment system, as long as you're just real careful about it. And then you could do bokashi, but for example, a worm bin, you'd want a container in which the worms can live. And you would just need the container that you collect your food scraps in. That's pretty much, yeah, because you don't have to aerate a worm system. And then Bokashi, I don't want to speak too much to it because you need to do some deeper education before you launch into that system, but it's definitely an option for someone who doesn't have any yard space. Yeah. Did that answer your question? We lost Susan, I think.
Susan? Oh, I don't see her either.
I don't see her.
Hopefully she'll connect pretty soon. We can go ahead and start with the second.
Oh wait, and one last thing is also if you live in an apartment, like I was mentioning, we have some students that live in apartments and they take that rotating bin and they put it in on their balcony. And if it's permitted by whoever's operating the facility, but it's something that you can put in your apartment or your condo. Just put it up if you have a balcony, of course. It's a pretty small system and it can handle smaller deposits, for 1 or 2 people.
I'm going to go back to that slide. I just found it to be very helpful. And we oftentimes get that question, like, what if I live, indoors in an apartment building? So this right here is what we call the tumbler.
Yeah, that's
in your apartment or your balcony.
Yes, Susan, you were the only one that got kicked out, but glad to have you back.
Welcome back.
So we have another question in the chat. Maddie, you might be able to answer this because they're asking if composting is available in Broward County. Were there any locations that you found up there?
There's a yellow market, the yellow farmers market, which is in the Hollywood area. I know they take compost. Where exactly in the farmers market, I'm not too sure. I'm not very familiar with Broward County, but I'm sure if we go online, then we can probably find some locations.
Okay, and they had a follow-up question that are the systems of composting different in Broward County, which I guess we could change into, are they different across like any county or any location, or are they similar? So maybe Tracy, you could.
The systems in terms of the individual units of that are the mechanism of compost, or like the structures that govern the region?
I'm not sure.
I'll just speak to both of them.
Okay.
I mean, the process of composting is universal, and any of those individual, whether it's a tumbler or it's just a large backyard bin or it's bokashi or worm, obviously those in and of themselves operate, can be operated anywhere. But there's different regulations in different cities, different counties, incorporated, unincorporated, about what is allowable. So for example, in some regions, you are not allowed to have a curbside composting program where, you can take people's compost from their front door and bring it to your farm. It just depends on how people categorize solid waste. It depends on not only that, but who is allowed to store, process, and transport quote unquote solid waste, if food scraps are even considered solid waste in your region. So it seems really easy, but if you are someone who wanted to start up a community composting project, you would want to look into that before you launch to make sure, is there an exclusive waste hauling contract with a large corporation? There's a lot of little nuance to it. So it's not permissible in all regions, all counties, all cities. And then on the other side of that, you have cities that are partnering with community composters because it's the easiest way of more larger scale composting to bring to the market, because it doesn't have as many upfront costs as, for instance, starting a landfill size industrial compost facility.
Got it. Okay, perfect. Thank you. And thank you to Nicole for that question.
Yes. Something I did want to say is it sometimes gets confusing what really composting is, but remember that composting is the process of actually breaking down your food scraps or that organic waste. So there are different ways that you can do that, right? So the composting process is the breakdown. So what you do before you start composting, it could be, you can store it in your bin, but that's not necessarily composting. That's just holding your food scraps until you put it into one of the systems, which is either the yard, or you can do the tumbler, or you can have worms break it down, or the bokashi method. So those are like the 4 methods we talked about that, break down your food scraps. Hopefully that helps too.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have any other questions, Alyssa, that you see coming up?
No, not on our end. Anybody else? Students, feel free to put in your questions.
All right, I'm gonna go back to the slide where we have additional questions. We have about 4 more minutes for the questions before we wrap it up.
So maybe Tracy can pick the ones she thinks are most important.
Well, I did want to mention, I heard a little bit in the background while I was trying to get on around a conversation around a plate. And I just, you know, one way to find out for sure if it's lined, I've had this experience where we have these, you know, compostable products, right? But they're meant for an industrial scale composting facility in order to break down. So you might have a product that you get at a restaurant and it says compostable, but it may not be compostable in a backyard or a community scale system. So people have put some of those in our community bins, and what ends up happening is that if there is that plastic liner, the microbes will eat all of the organic material, meaning all the cardboard, and they will leave behind a perfectly shaped plastic liner that was on that, either that coffee cup or that plate or whatever. So it is kind of interesting to experiment with it a little bit. You know, I don't want large bulk of contaminants in the composting bin, but you know, it has been interesting to pull out a perfectly lined coffee cup where all the cardboard was eaten and it just is this thin little sheen of a coffee cup. So a lot of materials do have thin plastic liners on them, and even some of the commercially compostable products have these PLA liners on them that aren't breaking down in the backyard system. So it's just something to be aware of. We don't have a lot of large-scale industrial composting in Florida. We just don't have those facilities available yet. So we really want materials that are universally compostable, you know, across all systems at this point in our region.
Awesome. We have another question from Valerie. She asked, would pests be an issue?
In composting, pests should not be an issue. So in my experience, a well-visited compost bin is not something that a critter wants to visit. So a lot of people, if they set up their backyard bin, they want to put it in the far corner of their yard instead of putting it right near their back door. Make it a place that they want to visit. And a consistent human presence does not create conditions that, you know, quote unquote, pests want to be present at. And if you manage your compost, you keep it turned in that, then it stays active in the process. And that's much less enticing to some kind of critter. I mean, we live in Florida, so yes, there are bugs around, but you're not going to want to open up your compost bin and have a whole bunch of fruit flies come out. That typically means that you left food scraps in there uncovered by a carbon source or not mixed up. There'll be a few bugs, but in terms of, you know, rats and that kind of thing, our compost sites are in the middle of city parks, you know, and obviously if we had issues with that, we wouldn't be able to keep our system. So it's a sign of an imbalance if you have critters hanging around your compost bin that can be addressed and fixed so that you can continue the process.
And how long does it take for the materials to decompose?
It depends on the kind of management style that you use. If you're someone who just tosses your material, some people never turn it. I don't recommend it because you'll get a better outcome if you do. But if you just toss it in your bin, cover it with browns and go, you know, you might get compost at the very bottom of the bin within a year. If you're highly managing your compost and you have a bunch of friends bringing their food scraps together and you turn it once a week, you're going to see a much faster turnover in the materials. You could get compost, you know, I would say a healthy, well, mature compost in 3 months. I like to make sure it's very cured so that we're giving something, you know, a more balanced food back into the soil.
Wonderful, thank you. And I just wanted to give a huge shout out to Antonio. Antonio was actually one of the students in the class that helped us use his skills in this course to create that video that you guys saw. So thank you, Antonio. You're also part of the team. Thank you so much.
That was a great video. That's great. Good job, yeah.
And I think that would pretty much wrap it up, unless somebody else may have any questions, or Susan.
No, I think that's good. Why don't we give them the last poll question? It's a single question.
You got it. All right, guys. So get ready. We're launching our last poll. This only has one question. You should be able to see it now. So essentially, how would you rate rate today's webinar? Let us know what you think.
We're looking for feedback, so.
Be honest.
Yeah. You guys are free to email me with your comments as well.
Yeah.
So like